Good evening, everybody. I'm Mary Bingham, the 9 times great-granddaughter of Sarah Wilde, and as promised tonight, I have the story of William Carr and John Carr and the brotherly love that was demonstrated in a deposition in 1692. Before I read my narrative, I would like to ask that you please like this video, subscribe to my channel, and please share this video on your social media channels. And here we go. A simple 1692 deposition in defense of Mary Bradbury eloquently speaks of one brother's love for another. William Carr's love for his then deceased brother John is a small, albeit bright light, shining in a time of dread and fear. Though this deposition was recorded at a lower court on the 7th of September in 1692 and was most likely not used at Mary Bradbury's trial, William was not going to allow his brother's death to become part of a witch hunt, all the while supporting a well-respected woman wrongfully accused of the felony of witchcraft. An important thing to remember is that William and his wife, Elizabeth, were lone voices in his own family to support anyone accused that year. His brothers were fiercely against Mary Bradbury of Salisbury, and his sister, Anne Putnam Sr., was an accuser of Rebecca Nurse, among others, in Salem Village. To further investigate the Carr family dynamics for an article that I will be publishing to the Uncommon Ground Media later in June of 2025, I took a deep dive into the colonial court documents, viewing the original scripts where available. A very telling document that I saw includes 2 petitions regarding the administration of the estate of the family patriarch, George Carr Sr. The first one reflected the voice of a Carr son-in-law, James Bailey, and the second reflected the voice of the family matriarch, Elizabeth. Now, George Carr Sr. was a shipwright who owned a massive amount of land, most of which was granted to him beginning about 1640. This real estate included a 57-acre island in the middle of the Merrimack River, and today that's known as Carr Island. The area of that island with its ferries includes 2 towns, those of Newbury and Salisbury. Eventually, the family house would be located on the island where all but possibly 2 of the Carr daughters lived. The inventory of this estate was valued at 1,100 pounds in 1682 when George died. Today, that's about $128,000, and that's only the movables in his estate. George Sr. died again in 1682 without leaving a will, which caused a great deal of headaches for the family, particularly the sons-in-law who felt they were getting a raw deal from Mother Elizabeth Carr. So they fought for their rightful, and I quote, inheritance, if you will. James Bailey wrote to the court that George Sr. was very sick and not able to draw up a will, and chose to leave it to the courts to decide how his estate would be divided. James claimed that his wife Mary was George's favorite daughter, and that the matriarch, Elizabeth, favored the sons. Elizabeth's own petition backs up James' claims, but she goes even further. Elizabeth described her son John, who was still alive when she wrote her petition, as being crazed in his head for 7 years. So he was probably suffered some type of mental challenge from 1675 to 1682. Her husband saw fit that John should live under the care of his brother James on the island, where Elizabeth herself would still be living. One can only wonder why George Sr. would seemingly designate the care of his single child, who was about 27 in 1682, and unable to care for himself, to his other single child. Why didn't he include his wife as a caretaker for John? And why didn't Elizabeth include herself as a caretaker for John in her statement to the court after her husband died? Elizabeth told the court that her eldest daughter, Elizabeth Jr., went to live with Elizabeth Sr.'s sister in Boston when Elizabeth Jr. was only 3 years old. And Elizabeth Jr. never returned to her family in Salisbury. In fact, Elizabeth Jr.'s husband, John Woodmansey, considered his wife a real child of her aunt and uncle than her own biological parents. Elizabeth Jr. died previous to her father, leaving her son James next in line to be a rightful heir of George Carr Sr. But Elizabeth, the matriarch, said no. James will not receive his mother's portion because his biological father's estate will take care of him. I also take it that maybe Elizabeth didn't want James's father to get his hand on Elizabeth Jr.'s portion for whatever reason. But her grandson James had been receiving about £16 per year from the Carr estate per the order of George Sr., and this was long before George Sr. had died. Then Elizabeth Sr. talked about her second daughter, Sarah, who also went to live with the same aunt and uncle in Boston when she was only 8 years old. Apparently, Sarah had already received £20 from the Bakers, probably upon her marriage to their son Thomas. So Elizabeth said, "Sorry, Sarah, no more for you." However, the other sisters, Mary and Anne, received slightly more than £20 at their marriages to James Bailey and Thomas Putnam, respectively, with Anne receiving slightly less than Mary. Again, nothing more at but again, there was nothing more for those two at George Sr.'s death. Elizabeth placed her daughter Anne as her least favorite child by leaving her with the least amount from her father's estate, at least in my mind, based on documents that were available to me when I was researching all of this. So, what did the sons get? Well, it seems that George Sr. Left Elizabeth and her sons George Jr. and James they were actually granted the administration of the estate from the get-go and were to bring the inventory to the next court session. So the court originally ordered that Elizabeth Sr., George Jr., and James would receive 180 lire each, and the other children to receive 90 lire each, and that grandson James would receive 24 lire. This administration of this estate went back and forth over many months and is very hard for this lay historian to follow and to fully understand right now. But my findings will be published in my forthcoming article. I couldn't find any court records placing William and John together at the same time, most likely because John, I couldn't find him mentioned in any court documents in any way being sued for anything. He wasn't a witness in anything. He didn't depose for anybody in anything. And maybe that's because he wasn't feeling well. So probably John stayed close to home, especially if he wasn't feeling well. William, like his father, was a shipbuilder, and I know this because in 1677, Robert Dutch sued George Jr. for not performing an engagement concerning a vessel which William agreed to build for him. There was another incident in 1679 where William was accused by his brother-in-law, Robert Pike Jr., for cutting and taking timber and plank for his vessels. It seems that William may have been quiet in his family and chose not to ruffle anybody's feathers. I say this because 10 years after George Sr.'s death, William is the only Carr family member who would defend a person accused of the felony crime of witchcraft, while his brothers would again go on to accuse Mary Bradbury. Not only that, but he would also sign a petition with his wife in support of that person, the aforementioned Mary Bradbury. In addition, William not only made a very eloquent deposition in defense of Mary, but he also stated before in defense of his brother, John, as well. William seemed to want to let the magistrates know that John died a peaceful death in 1689, and his death had nothing to do with witchcraft. I will now read William Carr's beautiful deposition in honor of both Mary Bradbury and his brother John Carr, dated the 7th of September, 1692. And this comes from the Records of the Salem Witch Hunt, page 604, document number 572. The testimony of William Carr, aged 41 or thereabouts, is that my brother John Carr, when he was young, was a man of good as, I'm going to go back and read that again. The testimony of William Carr, aged 41 or thereabouts, is that my brother John Carr, when he was young, was a man of as good capacity as most men of his age, but falling in love with Jane True, now wife of Captain John March, and my father, being persuaded by some of the family, which I shall not name, not to let him marry so young, my father would not give him a portion, which upon the match broke off, which my brother laid so much to heart that he grew melancholy, and by degrees much crazed, not being the man that he was from his dying day. I do further testify that my said brother was sick about a fortnight or 3 weeks, and then died, and I was present with him when he died, and I do affirm that he died peaceably and quietly, never manifesting the less trouble in that world about anybody, nor did not say anything of Mrs. Bradbury, nor anybody else doing him hurt, and yet I was with him till the breath and life was out of his body. It seems William stayed with John and supported him through his tremendous heartbreak, which was caused by his father's disapproval of him marrying so young. As William witnessed his brother's downward spiral, he stayed by his side to his deathbed, and this speaks volumes of William's character. Thank you very much.